As the sun rises over Tsukibi, the sprawling city awakens. The vendors of the market rush to set up their displays and show off their wares to the throngs of potential customers. Most of the sellers don't live within the city, but rather outside of its narrow streets, and come every Saturday for the open market. If you earn a profitable amount at your stall, then you can have a better placement in the next week's market. As citizens begin to fill the market and buy their weekly supplies, a young boy is wandering the streets before the busy day. Lost in his own thoughts, Elar ambles down the side streets and narrow paths. He has no plans for where he is going, thinking mostly about his life and the farm he lives on with his parents. Then, he hears a faint whimper. It's a spark trader, lying injured on the ground. Instantly feeling a kinship to the small creature, Elar gently lifts it up into his arms and conceals it from view for the rest of the day. In the following weeks, Elar devoted himself to nursing the small creature back to health, and eventually formed an unbreakable bond. He began to see changes in himself. He could almost sense what the spark trader was feeling. One day he felt the name Rok in his mind and knew this was the little spark trader's title. It isn't long before Elar's parents discover the secret he's been keeping. At first, they're surprised because they thought their son would carry on the family tradition and bond with breed cows like them. As the truth sinks in, they become more and more disappointed. Elar is heartbroken over this because he loves his parents deeply, yet never gave much thought to connecting with the farm animals to sustain the family business. For weeks, Elar attempted to make his parents understand the advantages of the spark traders, but they just wouldn't budge. Several other spark traders had taken up residence near Elar's home and would bring small offerings to him. Elar seemed to almost always have a small flock of the little beasts following him everywhere he went. One day at the market, Elar and Rok heard someone shouting about a certain shop. This was common on market days, as merchants had to either have exceptional products or find the right spot to draw customers in. Elar got an idea. He took all his money out of his pocket and hurried to the paper shop, purchasing as much of it as he could afford. Elar ripped the papers into smaller pieces and wrote on each of them, "Best Breeze Cow Cheeses, Stall 612. Then he looked to Rok and asked him and the other spark traders to take the papers to the busiest areas of the market and scatter them among the crowd. Without any hesitation, Rok and 5 other spark traders grabbed the handfuls of paper and took off into the air. Elar raced back to his family's cheese stall, hoping against hope that his plan would work. Rok and the others found several city squares where many people were moving about, looking into stalls and making purchases. At each square, they worked together to drop the little papers in front of people in hopes of attracting attention. Those who had never seen such a thing were immediately intrigued by what these mysterious flyers could be about, and followed the crowd to stall 612. Even those who hadn't come across one of Rok's papers couldn't help but join in on the excitement. Elar had never seen so many people come by his family's stall on a single day. It was so incredibly busy. He moved as fast as he could, helping his parents to sell the mini cheeses they brought with them to the market. His plan had worked, and he was grinning from ear to ear. Eventually, they sold out of all the cheese they had brought with them to the market day and had to turn customers away. When the rush of people finally ended and it was time to pack up and go back to the farm, Elar's parents looked at each other incredulously. What had happened to make them so popular today? Elar pulled a small paper out of his pocket, showing them what he had written and telling them how Rok and the others had spread papers in the busy areas of town. Elar's parents were so overwhelmed they didn't know what to say, but they did start to understand Elar's bond with Rok wasn't a disappointment. For the next several market days, Elar worked with Rok and the others to do the same thing: disperse papers advertising his family's stall and get many customers to visit. Each time they sold out of product. On the 6th market day, a man approached the stall and asked who was dropping the papers. Elar stepped forward and explained that it was his idea. The man introduced himself as a merchant who sold wine and was looking to have papers dropped to entice customers to his stall. He offered to pay a reasonable sum. Before taking the man's offer, Elar spoke to his parents. They knew that they would not have enough product to sell at the market every week since the cheese needed to age, but they would still need to find a way to bring home money and their weekly groceries. Elar suggested he could do the shopping next week and spread papers for the man instead. This began a side business for Elar where other merchants would come to him asking for paper drops to advertise their goods. Each week, Elar would only take on 1 or 2 customers, but over time, the market keepers who charged the merchants to use the stalls and keep them pristine started to notice. Some of the market keepers started offering to throw their own papers from the roofs of the buildings overlooking busy squares at just a fraction of the cost that Elar charged. Before long, this meant that lots of papers were being dropped from the sky, and many people began to be annoyed with the paper rainstorms. Most shoppers started to ignore the papers in favor of the shops they had always gone to or that other people were talking about. After only a few months of his side business, Elar was not getting any more customers. Several months passed, and while Elar's family was more than appreciative of the status his original stunt had achieved for their stall, Elar still felt very low. One day, as Elar was walking around, he saw a girl at stall 612. Her hair was tied up in a messy bun with a flower woven into the strands, and she wore an old dress. Elar went over to her and asked if he could help. The girl looked up at him with eyes full of wonder and pulled a dirty paper scrap from her pocket. It was one of the original papers he had made. She said she had come looking for the stall almost every week, but there was never anyone there. Elar's family had been moved to a larger stall after the first market day because of how busy their stall had become. Elar couldn't believe it. She had kept his paper this whole time, just to sample some of his family's cheeses. He asked her to walk with him to where their new stall was, explaining how they had moved. During their stroll, the girl told Elar of her family's small restaurant, which was struggling to gain popularity among the locals. They arrived at the new cheese stall, and Elar introduced her to his parents, who were surprised to see their son talking to a stranger. But when Elar explained that the girl had kept one of his papers, his parents welcomed her with open arms. The girl, whose name was Vala, told Elar and his parents about her family's restaurant and how they were having trouble attracting customers. Elar offered to help her by spreading papers advertising the restaurant in the busy areas of the market. Vala was overjoyed and thanked Elar and his parents. She promised to repay their kindness. Over the next few weeks, Elar created beautiful and intricate papers with depictions of the food at Vala's family restaurant. Almost a year to the day of the first paper drops that Elar had made for his family stall, he asked Rok to help spread the picturesque papers he had created for Vala. This time, he made sure not to spread too many papers at a time, each week spreading only about 50 papers. Week after week, the number of customers slowly started to increase. Elar's parents were happy to see their son helping out a neighbor and were proud of him. Vala was grateful to Elar for making her parents' dreams come true. After a month of paper drops, Vala and Elar decided to stop dropping papers since there was plenty of traffic to the restaurant, and it wasn't sustainable for Elar to keep hand-drawing each one. At Vala's family restaurant, it seemed like a normal day. The dining room was crowded and more people waited outside for a seat. Until a flailing flash of feathers and fur came screaming into the dining room, crashing directly into Vala. Rok was screeching and tugging at her, trying to make her move, but she wasn't bonded with him and didn't know what he was trying to communicate. After a few minutes of trying in vain to communicate with Vala, the little spark trader grabbed an old paper drop and some charcoal and took off out the door again. Vala was concerned and thought to herself that she would tell Elar how strange the tiny creature had been acting when she saw him later that day. It felt like an eternity to Elar, but eventually he could hear Rok frantically coming back. He was relieved to see his friend back and proud when Rok showed him the paper and the charcoal and could hear, "Talk! Vala! Help!" in his mind coming from Rok. Of course! Rok was incredibly smart. He had brought paper so that Elar could tell Vala where he was and what happened, so that he could get help. Rok waited impatiently for Elar to write the note, before snatching the paper and taking off again. This time, he landed on a table Vala was cleaning and shoved the paper in her face. Vala let out a gasp and told her parents that she needed to go help Elar, and ran out the door. She scribbled on the other part of the paper and asked Rok to fly ahead and take the paper to Elar's parents. Luckily, he understood and hurried away. As Vala got to where Elar said he was, she yelled out his name, hoping he would hear her and help her locate him. After a few minutes, she was able to hear him and find the closest part of the path to him. Elar was thankful his friend had brought Vala to help. Minutes later, Elar's parents hurriedly arrived, worry etched on their faces. Elar's father had thought ahead, bringing a long rope, several boards, and 2 of their breeze cow bulls used for hauling. While Elar recovered at home, his parents spoiled Rok with every spare bit of food they had, thankful for the little creature that saved their boy's life. It was funny to Elar to see how much had changed in barely over a year, but he couldn't keep the events of that day out of his mind. Without being allowed to go to market for a little while, Elar gave little notes to Rok to take to Vala. In turn, Vala would package up snacks for Elar and Rok to send back, though not all of the snacks always made it back. Once he was back to full health, Elar wanted to tell Vala about the idea he had been working on while recovering. Elar wanted to set up a paper drop service where people could come with small packages or papers and send them to their friends and family. Elar would work with Rok and the other spark traders to deliver things all over the city and even the surrounding farms. He knew it would take a lot of work, but he was confident that together they could make the service successful. Elar was excited to share his plan with Vala, but as he arrived at her family's restaurant, he was surprised to find it closed. A wave of panic washed over him as he realized something might have happened to Vala or her family. He knocked on the door, but there was no answer. He peered through the window and saw that the tables and chairs were stacked up, the kitchen was empty, and the restaurant was deserted. Elar was devastated. He had thought that Vala's family restaurant would be a huge success, and he couldn't believe that it had failed. He wondered if there was anything he could have done differently to help. As he walked away from the closed restaurant, he heard a familiar voice calling his name. It was Vala, standing at the edge of the market square. "Elar," she called out, waving.